Original church being designed by architect Richard Upjohn and the 1927 by his grandson, Hobart Upjohn. The pulpit, which is over here, carries some major figures of church history, including Charles Wesley and people like that. On the other hand, the lectern over here, the figures that are carved into the bottom of that are of King David and Jesus and biblical figures such as that. After the church was designed, really in the shape of a cross, if you look at this as the top end of the cross and the naves as the side pieces of the cross, and then the bottom part of the cross going down the aisle in this particular position, which is much like many European churches of old were designed. I was beginning to tell you about the pulpit. Originally, they were not the stained glass that you see there. Originally, they were the resurrection windows that were removed for repair, and when they came back, they put those windows here. Now, this is Tiffany, whereas that is a conic in design. And you can easily tell Tiffany from conic windows. Conic is from Boston, and he probably picks up most windows 1910 to 1930, whereas Tiffany is 1880s, 90s, and up into the 1900s. But Tiffany windows are soft, tell a story, appealing and easy on the eyesight, whereas conic windows tend to be very, very busy. These windows, however, show the 7 sacraments. And the Italian carving that came directly from Italy is called a reredos, R-E-R-E-D-O-S. And that shows some of the 7 sacraments in that as well. The choir pews, of course, are here. And then we can move on and talk about a couple of the windows, if you'd like. The first window we see here is about the resurrection. And you'll see the A and the, looks like an O up at the top. That's the Alpha and the Omega, which are the first and the last letters in the Greek alphabet, speaking of Jesus as the first and the last. This picture is the resurrection. He's already left the esophagus. You see the palm fronds laying across the esophagus, which symbolize his trip, the last trip into Jerusalem. The grave clothes are laying aside. The soldiers are pictured almost caught in a stunning, oh no, what's going on? But all eyes look to Jesus. Whereas the angels on either side are very peaceful with their hands clasped, but all eyes appear on the Lord. And the Lord doesn't appear as he's studying the subjects of the soldiers or the angels, but rather he seems to be caught up in talking to or about something else. So that's a major Tiffany window given by Albert Crocker, really for the inception of this church. And many of the Tiffanys are given by Albert Crocker. There are several Tiffanys, 9 in total, possibly 2 others might be. And there are a few conics. I have not actually counted them. But the resurrection in the nave, and finally the trip down the road to Emmaus on the other side of the nave, very important. It's when Jesus had already been resurrected, and he was walking on the road to Emmaus with 2 strangers, which you see on the left and on the right. And they were talking about what had happened in Jerusalem, and this strange man joined them. They walked about 7 miles without ever recognizing him. And it wasn't until they invited him to supper and he broke the bread and blessed the cup that they even recognized him. These circles up and around the Christ head are all the representations of the different heavens. When Louis Comfort Tiffany was making any stained window, he did so according to how the people that were purchasing the window wanted it to be. But then he added his own interpretation, and they're all biblical. Originally, windows, stained glass windows, were given in place of Sunday school lessons or even sermons, because some people were absolutely illiterate and could not read the scriptures, and so they were given to tell biblical stories. So those are just two of the Tiffany windows. And I think that there are two others that I'd only like to say maybe a paragraph about. And one of them is this first one, and it's rather difficult to see. I don't know whether you need to bring the camera down here or not, but let me just point out. This window was given by George and Alice Wayman, but we'll get there in just a moment. First of all, you see a drapery effect in the glass, and that was a famous style of Tiffany's to show drapery. Green always represented life. Blues usually represented the heavens and or water. And reds were almost a color of divinity, almost always. But there's a lot of light in this picture, and Jesus is holding the lambs. One lamb is looking unto him. The other sheep is drinking from the still waters. But the amazing thing about this window, two things are, they brought the Old Testament, Psalm 23, up into the New Testament, because you see on this window the nail-scarred feet, and you can see the nail scars on his hand if you look very carefully. So that brings him past the resurrection. But the interesting part of the people who gave this window is it was given to their two children. I can almost not say that without tears in my eyes. Both children died, one on June the 17th and one on June the 21st in 1878. Now imagine losing one child. Now imagine losing two children.
How did they die, do you know?
I don't know. I'm sure it was disease, but I don't know what kind of a disease exactly. But the fact that they lost two children, and yet they would give a window to a church that was so representative of hope and ongoing life in the greens that are shown and drinking from living waters, and that Jesus would be shown not only as the good shepherd of the old, but he would be shown after the resurrection of him on the cross by the nail scars in his feet and in his hands. There are other iconic windows showing Job from the book of Job and all that he went through and all of his many trials. But you notice how brilliant and how small the little pieces of stained glass are as compared to the Tiffany's that just flow. And so that's definitely iconic. We're back to a Tiffany here. And the amazing part of this window is we cannot tell whether this is a man or a woman given in this in this window. And that is that this person is holding the Word of God. Is it as important for a man to be knowledgeable about the Word or a woman? It really makes no difference, but it draws both male and female into this window. And I love these two windows because they're actually on the front facing Main Street, and they show the sunlight and the life that's in this church as a result of these beautiful windows. This window shows a resurrection angel, and as Tiffany was so well known for, we have the draped glass effect in her, and the beautiful chevron pattern in her wings. And you know, of all the windows in Christ Church, this has been the most damaged window of any of the stained glass windows. It's had rocks thrown through it. It's had ice chunks break it. It's been repaired several times. And it's one of the few that is actually signed by Tiffany. Tiffany Glass and Decorating Company. And Tiffany did not often sign his works, mostly because it was meant to appease the person who was purchasing them for the gift to the church, rather than to have his name attached. But all in all, they make a beautiful story. They resemble the scriptures that this church is so well known for teaching. And it's just a very, very glorious church here in the center of Fitchburg.